Welcome back. We are having our second conversation for the morning, and it's all about the opening of the cruise season. We are joined by two representatives to speak to us about that. We have here with us Bill Castaneda, and he is the Chief Tourism Officer at the Ministry of Tourism. And also joining him is Lloyd Enriquez, and he is the Director of Cruise at the Belize Tourism Board. Good morning, gentlemen,
Good morning.
and welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for
having us.
All right. Well, we should all be looking forward to the official opening of the cruise season, and to get a bit of a background on what we can expect and what's taking place so far. Lloyd, let's get your take on what we should be looking forward to.
All right. Thanks again, and good morning. Belize is part of the Western Caribbean itinerary. So what that means for us is that ships typically leave from Texas and Florida and come down to Yucatan, to Belize, and then on to Honduras, and then make a return visit. There are some ships that do go to Jamaica and Cayman and Bahamas, but typically Belize is part of that first itinerary that I mentioned. So we're right in the middle geographically. We're in the sweet spot, so to speak. And that itinerary typically doesn't work without Belize. So we're in a very strategic location. And the Western Caribbean, when it's compared to the wider Caribbean cruise product, is a relatively new one. Not as mature as the Jamaica and those farther out in the Caribbean. So the season for us typically starts mid-November and tapers off again in around mid-May or thereabouts. So we're about to really get into it. There will be many more cruise calls over the next few days and few weeks, sometimes 2 or 3 per day, and that'll be a couple days a week. So this is the season for us. November, December, January. You could expect to see that continued activity in terms of cruise calls to Belize.
Do you have a projection for this season of what we are expecting as it relates to the cruise tourism?
Right. So this year, January to December, will be, at the end of December, we'll be closer to about 850 to 900,000 cruise passengers.
Wow.
Our highest year prior to that was 2019, pre-COVID. So that was 1.2 million persons.
So we are approaching pre-COVID numbers.
We're approaching it. We're getting back to where we were, but still not quite. And that is in both sectors, in cruise and overnight. So in December, we're expecting over 100,000 overall passengers to call on Belize. And in January and February, we'll continue along that trend, over 100,000 passengers. And that is between both ports, Belize City FSTV, Belize City Port, and Harvest Key in the south, near Placencia.
And in terms of what we're expecting and the numbers, how do we, or let's say how, in terms of the people working in the sector, and how have, what are we, sorry, I'm lost my question. How have they been feeling the impact of, let's say, the return of the numbers to this level?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Cruise is a very dynamic industry. It's one of the industries in tourism, or one of the sectors in tourism that the man on the ground and the local business person and the local stakeholder really benefits. They get a direct impact. They get monies directly into their pocket, as opposed to if you contrast that to the overnight sector. So you're talking about small operators, tour operators, hairbraiders, artisans, vendors. They get that money directly into their pocket. The average spend for a cruise passenger is somewhere in the region of about 86, 87 US dollars per passenger.
Wow.
And that is across many different things, as I just mentioned, tours and all those other things in between, food and beverage, shopping, etc. There are about, at the last survey that was done pre-COVID, there are about 2,500 persons who directly are employed in the cruise sector, and spread across all those little small operators that I just mentioned countrywide, right? So we'll have to do another survey soon. As COVID is concerned, there was attrition. A lot of people looked at the vulnerability of the industry, and there was some attrition, but we believe, and the numbers show that we're getting back, as we said earlier, to pre-COVID levels. So we'll do another survey to get a good grip on what's going on employment and expenditure.
Wonderful.
I think during the pandemic, and there was up to about 4,000 employees we were looking at, indirect and direct within the industry, and so the economic impact, the socioeconomic impact of the sector of cruise is very important, especially for the communities that are near the port areas that they land. So it's quite substantial, and it's very good to see that, for instance, all our tour operators, or the numbers of tour operators we had before COVID, we have already surpassed that number. We have already surpassed the number of tour guides that we had even before COVID. So those are good indicators that the supply side of the industry is coming back up. The cruise sector, unlike the overnight sector, has taken some more time to kind of get back. I mean, for overnight, we are close to the 95% mark of recovery, and so in cruise, I think we are like 75 at this point. So it's taking a little bit more time because there's so much that is involved, deployment of ships, and earlier this year and last year there were issues with staffing on cruise lines. If you saw the international news, and similar to the issue with the pilots and crew members for the airline. So there's a lot of dynamic movement that happens within the industry, but we are glad to see that we do see substantial growth coming back out of COVID, because COVID was a very, basically everything came to a stop. It went to a zero, and a lot of people went through some tough times. A lot of businesses, as Lloyd mentioned, went under, and now they're hopefully coming back up and getting ready for this. This is the season. We said the season is where a lot of our local operators, vendors make their money. They make their money during the next few months that are coming for us now.
Another point that we want to discuss is the update in policy for tourism, and you are here, Abil, to speak specifically to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, like Lloyd provided a great backdrop to what we have been able to complete and accomplish with an update to the National Cruise Tourism Policy. After COVID, there was so much of a shock within the sector, within the economy, that it was very important for us as a country to look at our plans and look whether or not we need to revise them based on new market trends that we're finding. So we commissioned a update of our cruise policy. We also did similar with our National Sustainable Tourism Master Plan, which we'll be rolling out shortly. But with the cruise policy, it's a process that has taken almost about 2 years, because we're very careful in trying to understand the dynamics of the industry. There's so much that has changed after COVID. A good example would be, for instance, the average cruiser, the person that comes on a cruise line, was before COVID around 55 to 60 years. Today, they're 45. They're getting younger. So cruise is becoming a much more viable travel option for people.
I can tell you off the bat, my youngest sister, she is 21, and she was on a cruise just recently. Young people like the cruise now?
Yeah, we're seeing families, we're seeing a different demographic, and we've also seen that coming out of COVID internationally, we have been used to seeing these, as you have on the screen there, larger ships that are 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 passengers. Coming out of COVID, there has been a boom of smaller ships, 300, 500, 600 passenger ships that provide more luxury-based options, that provide adventure and expedition-based options. And we feel that Belize has a great role to play in capturing that market. And so those are some of the reasons why we said, you know what, we need to look at our policy. We need to establish a guideline for the next 10 years as to where is it that we want to land in terms of cruise tourism. And so we started that process. We developed a cruise working group, which was made up of the private sector, the public sector, and even the civil sector, making sure that they guide and provide an oversight of the process that we undertook. The updated policy was done in-house, so it's homegrown, and we're very proud of it. And in the initial stages, also we could have written a new policy, but when we looked at what was the current policy back then, we realized that a lot of what was in there was still very much relevant. The original policy for cruise was heavy on environmental stewardship and protection, and we feel that that still needs to remain. But there are other elements that were missing in the original one. So that's what we went through, a series of different consultations, focus groups, discussions with the different stakeholders, all the way from our vendors to tour operators to even the cruise lines and the international organizations, to understand really what they see the Belize product being within this Western Caribbean and within the larger Caribbean product. So a lot of that went in, and we were able to come together and establish an updated policy that, one, aligned the country and aligned that cruise sector with our master plan and also the national tourism policy. It provided a roadmap for us to grow over the next 10 years. And three, it allowed us to embrace the things that are important. You know, one thing that we found when we were doing our analysis is that there is so much opportunity that is lost with the cruise sector at our attractions, even at the point of selling to our cruise tourists, overall experience. And so there's so much that we can improve and still grow on. And so the policy really provides sort of the backdrop and the framework for that to be able to happen.
And the process of consultation with the stakeholders, can you talk a little bit more about what that was like in terms of getting feedback from all of the different sectors?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned earlier, the one positive thing to start with at the beginning of the process, we established this group, right, made up of different organizations, you know, the BTIA, the Department of Environment, the network of NGOs, so that we ensure that we have different angles of perspectives that would guide the process. That's the first one. We also set up a series of focus group sessions with different stakeholders, with the cruise lines, with government ministries, with the stakeholders that work in the sector per se. We also had a national consultation in 2022, I believe, where here in Belize City at the Biltmore, we invited all the key sector stakeholders to go through with us two things. One, what is the situation of the industry, you know, like a SWOT, you know, what are the things that we can take advantage of, what are the things that are threatening us? And then secondly, to establish what are our priorities. What do you want to see us prioritize for the next 10 years from cruise tourism? And interestingly enough, some amazing things came across in those consultations. The original policy was very heavy on the environment and on the economic impact, but there was also new elements that were brought in, things like social equity within the industry, things like cultural integrity, and things like climate resilience and overall resilience building for the industry. So these are new elements that weren't here when the original policy was established, and we're glad to see that it's very comprehensive in being able to capture what were the main concerns and the main areas that the industry itself wanted to see from the policy itself.
It is important to highlight that process because it was one of inclusivity. In the past, many years ago when cruise tourism was taking off, it was a very top-down approach in terms of policy making and how we devised the policy. So this one, we took a completely different approach, and it was those actors, those stakeholders in the industry who was telling us, listen, this is really what is happening on the ground, this is what you need to be focusing on, and that is what is reflected in the policy at the end of the day. So that approach, I'm very proud of it in the way it was done, and it actually could become a model for how we develop future policies for tourism in general.
Looking at that policy and comparing it to what was before, as Director of Cruise Lloyd, what do you see as the positive impacts of this policy?
Well, as Abil mentioned earlier, it encompasses a lot more things than what we used to focus on in terms of, for example, social equity, human trafficking. There are so many things that have happened or has developed globally that never used to be an issue or was never a focal point. So for me in particular, I always try to ensure that tourism needs to benefit the ordinary man on the ground. And you'll see many elements of this in the policy in terms of inclusion, training, capacity building of people in the industry so that we can be competitive globally and also to earn the revenue. Tourism doesn't really matter unless our people are benefiting from it. So you'll see a lot of social elements, a lot of economic benefits that we hope to encompass and empower our people to become a part of this industry. So for me, that's what is really, really critical at the end of the day. You know, we can talk about all the other things, carrying capacities and everything else. If it is not impacting the person on the ground, then it's for nothing really.
So is there any gaps that still needs to be filled as we look at this policy and as we prepare for what is the future of cruise tourism in Belize?
Yeah, I mean, well, before I get into that, just to add something about you, as what were something different or the main elements of the policy. For me, and I think from a personal point, going through COVID, what COVID brought was many negative things, but in the cruise industry, and I think for the overall tourism industry, there was something that happened in the back end that was amazing, which was it really compelled us to work with one another. In the cruise sector, we have always been, just communicating one-on-one, but because of the pandemic, we all came together and we started to communicate as a community, as a group. And that is kind of what translated into the working group that we established and translated into a new element of the policy called democratic governance. And so under that element, the working group actually is now being transitioned into a cruise destination committee, which would be housed under the Ministry of Tourism to ensure that engagement continues, right? To ensure that communication continues, which has been very valuable for us. But going to the other area, yes, there are many gaps. One of the main policy aims that came about in this process is that we need to also establish what the vision is, what the capacity is for cruise passengers in the country, because you can be allowing more and more growth, but there is also detriment that you create with just allowing unbridled growth within the industry. So in 2019-2020, there was a carrying capacity that was developed under the Belize Tourism Board, and that was based on the scientific methodology of developing carrying capacity, trying to answer the question, how much can really grow. And that carrying capacity established two scenarios. It said that from a really optimal point of view, Belize can grow up to 4.2 million passengers a year. And then there was other scenarios that were optimal, utilizing different parameters. When we went through this process, everyone said clearly, 4.2 is way too much. That would bring too much detriment to the environment or our social fabric and all of that. And so we landed on what was more a balanced approach, in that for the next 10 years or even more, the policy has a main aim of setting a path towards 2.5 million passengers for the year.
Wow.
That is a huge undertaking. And
Over 10 years.
Over 10 years or even more. And asking about gaps, for that to happen, that won't happen automatically.
Yeah.
We cannot handle 2.5 right now. There's so much more that needs to go in. We need berthing facilities, we need more tour buses, we need more destinations to be able to take, more things to share with our visitors. So
more human resource.
More human resource, exactly. So all of that is captured under the policy, but that is kind of what we are moving towards in the long term. In addition to that, there are other gaps that exist. One of the things that came up very clearly during the sessions is that there has to be a huge consideration of what we're doing on the ground in terms of safety and security, because there's a perception within the industry that it is an unsafe destination when it really is not. And so there is an element of work that we need to do with the cruise lines to ensure that that perception is changed and that we do our part as well. And then another main thing that came up is our environment. As much as the original policy was so much inclined towards environmental stewardship and all of that, today our cruise passengers are telling us that one of their main concerns is the garbage situation within our destinations. And so, that's amazing to us, but I mean, you can see it around. So there's a call in the policy, and in fact, there's a call in national policy for tourism that we want to make a very good effort in trying to address that situation. We're seeing it on our highways, we're seeing it in our communities. There's something that we need to do to change that, because it's affecting, well, our quality of life and obviously the experience that our visitors is having.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I'll use this opportunity to ask if you have any other information that you'd like to share as it relates to the sensitization of this policy.
Well, not specifically on the policy itself, but I would like to say that in our discussions, and this is a personal pet peeve of mine, not a pet peeve, but it's a wish. I want to transform the image of the cruise industry in Belize, or how it is perceived. And one of the things that I think would be most impactful is if the cruise lines could look at us as a source for some of the products. We have a very strong agricultural sector, and I've already started to engage the cruise lines. We've started to engage them in looking, and so they'll come to Belize and they'll look at what we have to offer and actually source products from us. So as opposed to just coming, having a little farm trip and then going back, there are other economic pockets that we can open and ways we can engage the cruise industry. So I'm really looking forward to that. But in terms of the policy itself, I think it is very well written. It was born out of inclusivity, and I think that is what will make the difference this time around. There's a lot more buy-in, and the real stakeholders on the ground played a very crucial part in its development. So I'm really excited to see what the next few years will bring in terms of all that we need to accomplish to make Belize a very, very competitive cruise destination.
And just to share, I know we're running out of time, but there's, if anyone wants to read the policy, it's already up and live. You can get it on our website, www.tourism.gov.bz. And I also, on some of the slides, provided a QR code for those that wanted to get that. But as we mentioned, we could spend 2 hours talking about what all the policy has in store. The main element is that there is a roadmap now for the next 10 years for cruise tourism. There is an intent, commitment by government to ensure that we do that in an inclusive manner, and that we try our best to ensure that the economic benefits are shared equitably across the destinations, and that we remain strong with our environmental stewardship goals. So those are some of the main elements that we have within the new updated policy, and we invite anyone that would want to take a little closer look at it to do so. Next week, December 7th, we have actually here in Belize City at the Radisson. A sensitization session where we will be inviting our cruise stakeholders to come in, and we will present to them the final policy more in detail. So if anybody is interested, please feel free to reach out to the Belize Tourism Board and to register their interest.
Wonderful. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us, sharing all the update on the tourism policy and what we can expect from this cruise season as well. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you too.
All right, we are going to take another break, and when we come back, the conversation is all about the Honey Symposium. Don't go away.